connection that goes back to the Civil War, maybe from this very county, or somebody that served either north or south. It affected the whole nation, right, in the middle of the 1800s. There was nobody that was not touched by the American Civil War in some way, shape, or fashion. And the scope and scale of the conflict was unprecedented, either before or since. And we'll kind of talk through that as we go. I'll begin by talking about the initial call-up of the state of Illinois and what it was required by President Abraham Lincoln in the earliest days after the firing on Fort Sumter. We'll talk about what it looked like in the state for that initial call-up, and then we'll talk about Fulton County specifically. And there's just simply not enough time. This would be probably a week-long course just to talk about Fulton County and the Civil War. So I'm really going to hit the wave tops of a few characters that were involved in the units from either Lewistown or Canton, and we'll talk about them in a little bit at length. I'll feature 3 specific units that had Fulton County men in it, and we will go through their order of battle. We'll talk through the sequence of these 3 units and where they fought and what that looked like. And we'll kind of wrap this up at the very end with a talk about Vicksburg, because Vicksburg, raise your hand if you've ever been to Vicksburg battlefield, okay? So to me, that's the mecca for Fulton County, and I'll show you why. So it's the mecca for the Western theater and the Civil War, okay? And just to define that, we are specifically talking about the Western theater operations for the Fulton County boys. There was a war in the East going on simultaneously. You know about George McClellan. You might know about Gettysburg. Everybody knows about Gettysburg. Gettysburg is the sexy, gets all the attention, it gets all the trips. But for me, Vicksburg is our Gettysburg. It's our equivalent, if not more important, and I'll explain why that is. So, and again, some big thank yous here. Becca and John, thank you for having me host this. Rick, certainly for you and your setup, that you dialed in the very nice optics, so I appreciate that. My family for being here, and many of you out in the crowd that I've known for years, so I appreciate you being here tonight. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so to set the stage, and again, most of this is just a quick history lesson of what was going on leading up to the call-up of men from Illinois and ultimately Fulton County. Lincoln was elected the 16th president, and that set off a series of events that led us to what we're going to talk about. He beat out 3 men to win the election. Actually, backing up to the Republican National Convention, he beat out 3 men just to become the Republican nominee to go against the Democrats to become the president. But he beat out 3 prominent men at the time, but the issue was they all canceled each other out because they were all Democrats. And what they did, and Stephen A. Douglas was one of those, of course, and when they did that, they split the vote, and John Breckinridge was the other one that gave him fits, but Lincoln was elected. Obviously, South Carolina says, hey, we're not doing this, we're out. We're not going to take orders from a president who is an abolitionist, who is out and out against our way of life, and that's how they saw it. So I'm just going to cut through this. Soon after that, by February, 6 other states go ahead and they secede from the United States. Jefferson Davis is elected for the Provisional Confederate States of America. And lo and behold, South Carolina, Lincoln does a masterful job of kind of baiting them into firing on Fort Sumter. I won't go into all of that, but he was masterful and very strategic in making it so that the South would fire the first shots. That was very important politically at the time. So after that, by April 15th, Lincoln says, hey, this is the real deal. He's not sure if it's going to be a pushing and shoving match, if it's going to be a slap fight or a knife fight. At that point in in the contest. It really wasn't known, but things were escalating very, very fast. People were choosing sides. Former classmates at West Point were choosing sides. Officers were resigning their commissions and joining the Confederate States, and it just started to snowball really quick. And for context, 75,000 troops in 1861 would be the equivalent of 750,000-ish troops today if it was called up right now. The United States now is 10 times larger than it was in 1860, so just using that simple multiplier, can you imagine 750,000 men from your community being called up just basically overnight, okay? I'm gonna hold questions till the very end just to keep this thing rolling. Excuse me, wrong way. Okay, so this telegraph comes from Simon Cameron. He's the Secretary of War to Governor Yates of Illinois. This same message went out to all the Union, who was left in the Union, state governors to call these men up. This isn't an exact copy of the actual transcript of the paper, but it's the actual wording. So if any of you are English majors in here and you're picking that apart, I didn't do it. But that is the call up saying, hey, we need six regiments of militia. I'll talk about what a regiment is here in a minute. In addition to that, he follows that up on the 19th and says, hey, as soon as you have enough troops, get their butts down to Grand Cairo, down to Cairo, Illinois, okay? And we'll talk about why here in a minute. So the governor, in turn, sends this message to General Swift, who's in the state militia. Okay, the state militia, there was already several thousand men that drilled on weekends, kind of like I do in the National Guard. There was already a militia in the state that had some military equipment, weapons, but they were very they were amateurs and they weren't well trained. But that's all he had at that time. And he calls for General Swift to get as many men as you can and get down there to Cairo pronto. All right. Most of you in here that have ever driven south know that Cairo is a long ways away from here. It's way down on the tippy end of Illinois. Not a destination location for most people. But at that time, as today, it is strategically located. In 1861, they knew that out east. They knew how important Cairo was going to be in fighting this war. And if you can see, it's further south than the capital of the Confederacy. Why is it important? It's at the confluence of that river and that river, the Mississippi and the Ohio. Those were the two main arteries in the nation at that time. Anybody that lived in that period of time, high likelihood, if not those rivers, other navigable rivers, they traveled on riverboats, on steamboats. That was the main mode of transportation to get large amounts of men and equipment and commerce up and down the Mississippi and the Ohio. Feeding in there is the Missouri, that we all know feeds in at St. Louis, and two other strategic rivers, the Tennessee and the Cumberland. We'll talk about real quick why those are all important. You'll really see the picture when you kind of dial it in. These are strategic locations that the North knew they needed to capture so that they could operate in the West and strangle ultimately the South into submission. Vicksburg, New Orleans. So you can see why Cairo, Illinois, of all places, was so strategic, right? All right, moving on. Call up of the first 6 regiments. I'll kind of touch on these really quick. The state government convenes, the legislature, they decide, hey, yeah, we're going to put treasure towards this, we're going to equip our men. General Order Number 1 highlighted was for the state militia, the call up of the actual service for the state militia. Again, that'd be like federalizing the National Guard right now. And then they call for immediate organization of 6 regiments of state volunteers. Volunteers are not the militia. Volunteers are on top of the militia. Volunteers are additional call up of people that are right out of right out of the bank, right out of the school teacher, you name it. We need help right now. Turns out they have no trouble filling these 6 regiments, okay? And I'll get to what a regiment is, like I told you here in a minute. Yeah, I have some visuals. So this is a nice little fun fact. The state says, hey, they did this 15 years earlier for the call-up for the Mexican War. They used 6 regiments then, and they were 1 through 6. So the state says, hey, out of respect for those 6 regiments that we called up for the Mexican War, we're going to start counting our new regiments at number 7. So if you're ever looking for Civil War regiments in the 1 through 6, they don't exist for Illinois. That was free. I didn't know that before I started doing this. All right, the 7th, one of my favorite all-time pictures. This has been colorized. This is the 7th Illinois, and they mustered in and they were ordered to Alton. So not everybody went straight to Cairo. Some you'll see went to Cairo, some went to Mountain City, some went to Alton, and all areas around there, okay? But they got the famous Henry rifles. Most of you in here that are weapons people, gun people, you know that that was really one of the first modern weapons that would be instrumental in the future development of the Winchester and so on and so forth. The 8th, under Colonel Oglesby, he was beloved by his men. They would end up calling him Uncle Dick. He ended up being the governor of Illinois in 1865. Lincoln pulls him out of active service, and after Yates, he's the next governor of Illinois. The 9th, with this beautiful man, Eliezer Payne. He was mustered in. He had the unfortunate, unfortunate events later in the war. He's put in charge of Western Kentucky after we kind of occupied that whole west side of the state. And he later gets court-martialed because he was so severe to the locals. The guerrillas and some of the bad people that were doing stuff behind enemy lines. Beyond punishing them, he was executing a lot of people and ended up being court-martialed over it. He ended up getting let off, but it was kind of a unique story. The 10th, under Benjamin Prentice. Prentice would go on to infamy at Shiloh, and he was the fellow that held down the center of the first day battle on April 6th, when they were overwhelmed by the Confederates by surprise, and a place called the Hornet's Nest. Have you ever heard of the Hornet's Nest? That was just a nasty spot in the center of the Union line, and he held it, but they were surrounded, and 2,200 Union soldiers ended up getting captured, and he was one of them. He ended up getting furloughed 6 months later. But the guy next to him, this fella, wasn't quite so lucky. Wallace was next to him. He was a division commander at Shiloh, and he was killed on the battlefield on that day. Shiloh was a mess. We'll talk about that in a minute. The 12th, John MacArthur. He was out of Chicago. He was a Scotsman. Yeah, big surprise. No relation to General MacArthur. Mac Carter. He's a Mick Carter. But he ends up fighting all the way through the war, and his Scotsman regiment became quite famous. So these were the first 6 Illinois regiments called up. So popular was this endeavor, for whatever reason, that 10 additional regiments were formed up. They had so many volunteers, they actually had men and boys that were crossing the Mississippi to join the Missouri call up in Missouri, because there just was, it was really confusing in the early days of the war whether or not they needed these many regiments. The federal government's paying the bill. Uncle Sam, out east is the one writing the checks to pay the soldiers. States just couldn't go willy-nilly and call up, as many as they wanted. They needed permission to say, hey, are you going to pay our troops if we form them up in a regiment? So there's a lot of confusion in the early days, if that makes sense. So these next 10, kind of go through, we'll go through those quickly. First one out of Dixon. Wyman, the first one, is killed at Chickasaw Bayou. He was with Sherman down at Vicksburg trying to cut a path through the swamps. So you can see there's a splattering of these regiments called up all over the state. The reason for that is these are all congressional districts. So what they did is they spread it out all over the state so that everybody got a piece in one of these regiments in a congressional district. Okay. Leonard F. Ross, and I have a whole thing here in a minute about the 17th Illinois, so bear with me. And Ulysses S. Grant, he had no connection to Mattoon, Illinois, other than he was down at Springfield for the initial call-up. When they called up for those 6, he had a Mexican war experience. He was up in Galena working with his father and his brothers. He just kind of rolls into Springfield saying, hey, I'm here if you need me. You know, he wants to be a part of this. They're like, hey, yeah, thanks. You know, we got these 6 filled. Appreciate it. Take a seat. But he does stay down there, and he helps train and drill the initial call-up of soldiers that are at all over Springfield trying to figure out how to hold a weapon, how to hold a musket. So he is instrumental. And when they started filling these next 10, they needed a guy, and he was the guy. And this is where he started out on Mattoon in the 21st. And they were a bit of a troublesome regiment in the beginning, so he whips them into shape. So broad stroke formations, and this is what happens in Illinois for the duration of the war. There ends up being 150 infantry regiments. Okay, and jumping ahead, I'll tell you there's supposed to be roughly 1,000 men in a regiment. Okay, 150 regiments that are called up. Not all of them see active combat. Not all of them are on the front lines in any battle. Some of the ones that come in later are rear guard regiments that are prison guards, or they're kind of holding down some of the territory that had been already taken by the North. So you needed all these rear guard units to hold the territory after the initial fighting force moves on. So some of these guys are kind of reserved towards the end of the war. In addition, there were 17 cavalry regiments, and a cavalry regiment was usually a little larger than an infantry regiment. They could be as big as 2,000 horsemen. And then there were 2 artillery regiments, with both of them had a battery A through M. And just gee whiz, these were some of the initial call-ups. There was a lot of kind of homegrown, local units that kind of sprung up out of the cornfields, if you will, and they kind of had their own names, they kind of had their own flavor. Most of them were absorbed into a bigger regiment as the war went on. But some of them kind of kept their moniker. You know, the Canton Rifles, I'll talk about the 7th Illinois is one of my 3 units we're going to talk about. But and dragoons, if you're curious what a dragoon is, they were kind of a hybrid they were like a mounted infantryman. So they were on horseback, but they were trained in infantry tactics, and they were, I don't know, I call them a hybrid between cavalry and infantry, was a dragoon. So some fun facts. Illinois, before it was over, we had well over 200,000 men that had served. We had black soldiers, black units, and we did have some people that were drafted by the end of the war in this state, and over 5,000 paid for a substitute. If they were wealthy enough, they could avoid the draft basically by paying their way out of it. All right, this is where we're going to talk about a company first. We'll talk about a company, which is one of the smallest elements of a regiment. Okay. Sorry if I'm talking fast. I got a lot of material to cover, and I don't want to get caught up on anything. But and some of you in here know all this. If you're bored right now, have a cookie, take a nap. But the rest of you might be learning a little something in here, and hopefully you take something out of it. So, again, this is a company. Let's just call it 100. Let's just call it 100 for the sake of an easy number to follow. Okay, 100 men in a company. 10 companies in a regiment. Regiment of infantry. You have a colonel at the top, lieutenant colonel, major. So let me talk about how they came up with the structure of these officers and even the non-commissioned officers at the top. a company, the men in the company would elect the captain, the lieutenants, the first sergeant, and the sergeants. They would basically hold an election of 100 people. And most often it was just a popularity contest to who for whatever reason they liked the most, or thought they had an education, or had some level of smarts, or maybe they had some military experience, whatever. Then the 10 companies would get together, and only the officers would vote to who the regimental brass was going to be. Okay, so they elected the colonel, lieutenant colonel, major, and again, they use things like, again, obviously how well you were. Lawyers seemed to fare really well as leaders at that time. They were highly educated. But sometimes it was a matter of your political clout. If you, and I'll get to that here in a minute, we talked to a couple people that personally knew Lincoln. And when they knew Lincoln, like, wouldn't it be a good idea to have your colonel at the top be a guy that, Lincoln personally knows, to maybe gain you favor in your unit somehow, or whatever. So I think there was a lot of the political games that were played as well. And some of those worked out well. Some of these officers were fantastic, brave, and others were absolute garbage. Others were terrible. And everywhere in between. You saw that all across the nation. Now these are the volunteers that are called up. These are who I'm talking about, volunteers. At the same time, the United States had active duty units as well. Kind of like even like today. We have active duty, Army, blending with volunteers. And it didn't always go the greatest, because some of these guys were severe politicians. And when they got together with the likes of General Grant, he really wasn't a politician. He was a career Army guy up to that point. He, different mindset going into some of these campaigns and battles. Okay, moving on. What next? Okay, I'm going to give you an example now of what the Army looks like. And this is a Union Army. We're talking about the 17th Illinois. This is out of Peoria. And they have two companies. C and H are Fulton County boys. C is primarily Canton, and H is primarily Lewistown people. There's a hodgepodge of some others. There's other cats and dogs in there mixed in. But that's the lion's share. And Leonard Ross, was in Company H when he first enlisted to join. I'll talk more about him in a minute. All right, in a regiment, moving up, you have a brigade. A brigade is typically 3 or more regiments. Okay, these are formations that are going to go into battle. If you're ever studying the battles that take place, kind of need to know this stuff. There's no test at the end. He's taking notes. There's no extra credit or nothing. So I kind of keep it orange to kind of show kind of how this blends in. So a division then would be like 3. I mean, it's kind of a multiplier of 3. In some cases it was 2. In some cases it was 5 regiments in a brigade. It just depended on how many were available. Right? A corps. Okay, so later in the war, by Vicksburg, McPherson, I'll talk about that in a minute. General McPherson, General Sherman, and we all know, everybody knows Sherman, right? Sherman was the corps commander at Vicksburg. So he's over buku people. Okay, each one of these little squares is one guy. There's 100 in there. You can do the math. And then the Army. So in this case, by the time of this battle at Vicksburg, Ross is out of the fight. Okay, that's why you're not going to see his name at the brigade or the division level. And I'll go through that in a minute. So you got a colonel at the regiment, you got a 1-star general at the brigade level, 2-star at the division, 2-star at the corps, and a 2-star at the Army. General Grant's a 2-star, only a 2-star general. That's because up to that time, the highest rank in the Union Army was a 2-star general. In the North. In the South, they had 3-star generals. The South, and I won't go into all that because that's a whole nother, you don't care, but the Southern Army was structured a little bit differently. Okay? So that just kind of gives you an idea of what, this is the Army of the Tennessee. Okay, this is what would go into battle at Vicksburg. Can you imagine? Can you imagine moving that many people? Supplying and logistics and food and It's crazy, crazy. I'm going to touch on uniforms. Just a quick overview. I didn't need this slide because Chris is here and he brought the uniforms. He's wearing one, and that's bonus. So, a couple pictures here of infantrymen. These are all tintypes. You see that emblem on his hat, his Hardy hat up there. It's a trumpet-looking thing. I'll show that here in a minute. But that's the infantry insignia. And then these were produced, kind of cabinet photos that were produced probably maybe even after the war. But this model, this was a beautiful man at the time with a beautiful beard, and he models the Union uniform. And one of the most coveted pieces of material in there, and Chris would know this, is that poncho. That poncho is worth its weight in gold because of the elements that these men were exposed to. We'll talk cavalry real quick. These are the horsemen, and these guys were kind of the pampered. They were like I think the infantrymen were pretty jealous of the cavalry guys because they got the pretty ladies. They were the gallant horsemen, right? Custer out of Michigan. Custer was a cavalryman. Of course, he didn't fare so well later. But here's the insignia, the cross cannons for artillery, cavalry, pretty standard. Today, I think cross muskets or cross rifles now is the infantry. Most of you Army guys in here, can you speak to that? Probably cross rifles. Weapons, I'm going to just breeze through these. This is the 1842 musket. The musket, they were either produced in Springfield, Massachusetts, or Harpers Ferry, Virginia. It wasn't West Virginia just yet because they hadn't split off from the mothership from the state of Virginia. A popular round for those was something called buck and ball, and that was the sleeves of paper with gunpowder in them, and they'd rip it off with their teeth and they'd pour it down the muzzle, right? And they put the rest of it, the buckshot and that 69-ish caliber ball would get packed down in there when they shot it. If the big ball didn't get you, those buckshot might get you. So they're really deadly. They've been in use since the American Revolution. It was nothing new at the time of the Civil War, but buck and ball was a very popular round for the muskets because the muskets had a very short range, about the length of a football field, max. So you had to be up close. If you're going to hit your enemy anywhere in the torso or in a place that you're going to cause damage, you needed those extra balls in there to kind of spread out and try to hit something. As time went on, by 1855, Springfield had a rifled musket coming out, and it shot the famous mini balls. We all heard of those probably if you're study history. But it was a rifled barrel, again with grooves, and when that mini ball went down, got packed down in there, and when it came out, it flared out in the backside of it and dug into those rifling in the barrel and came out spinning like a super fast football. And the accuracy was 3 times what it was in the one up above it. So very deadly by the time that those came out. They made different models of them, clear up into the clear through the war. Enfield, this is a British kind of version of the same type of rifle. This is Springfield, 1855, and they came over from England. They went in large numbers to the south, but they also made their way out this way, and the 103rd ended up carrying some of those Enfields. And we already talked about the Henry. That's the most beautiful thing on the screen. And if you have one of these original ones, hang on to it. It's probably worth $50,000 on up. They're highly sought after. 44 caliber, a rim fire, and 15 rounds down the tube, magazine tube, and probably 1 in the chamber. I think you could get 16 rounds into that thing. The cavalry, the 7th Illinois Cavalry carried the Smith carbine, 50 caliber, and that was a breakdown, kind of broke in half, and then you put the round in from the kind of right behind where the hammer is. the famous Sharps, those were used for decades as buffalo rifles. That's a carbine version. 1860, this was the Army model of pistol, mostly carried by the cavalry. Infantry didn't carry pistols too much unless they bought them on their own. They weren't typically issued. Light cavalry saber, and the 1849 NCO sword, those mostly went to infantry NCOs. So, halfway, all right. So, just some more stats. Population in Illinois in 1860 was 1.7 million people. And the population of Fulton County in 1860 was 338. Anybody have an idea what it is today?
Pretty close.
Pretty dang close.
Yeah.
Almost the same. Isn't that crazy? All right, we're going to start touching on the Fulton County piece of this. All right, there were four companies in 3 different cavalry regiments. I'll kind of list them out. So the 3rd Illinois had Company H, the 7th had Company K. That company, back it up, Company H, it had a hodgepodge of people from all over the state. And I only really found, on the muster rolls, there was only a handful of Fulton County people. I don't even know why they called it a Fulton County company, but they did. It really was pretty minuscule. But Company K was chock full of Canton men. And then the 11th was chock full of, Company B was almost all Farmington. And then Company G was kind of a splattering of Lewistown, Cuba, Astoria, and Ipava. Now we'll talk infantry units, okay? Okay, there were 36 companies in 17 different regiments. So the 17th, I'm going to do a deeper dive into them, so we won't talk about them too much. The 51st saw action all over the place. It's a wonder any of those guys made it out alive. But I'll kind of show you, I've circled some of the early battles. Fort Donelson, the 17th was in, again with Leonard Ross. And then as time went on, you start seeing more and more of these regiments merge in at Shiloh, Corinth, Mississippi, even more. Vicksburg, okay? That's the common theme, Vicksburg. Everybody rolls into that. It's in, it's in July, it wraps up in July of 1863, so there was plenty of time for these regiments to form up and get down there. I highlighted the ones that went on to the Atlanta campaign and the March to the Sea. And then I just kind of threw a red line under Franklin and Nashville. Those were some famous battles with General Schofield fighting Hood there around Nashville. Franklin was a nasty battle, really nasty. Okay, these are the rest. Just going to touch on a couple. The 85th, I actually have Company H's roster up here. My friend Kurt Duncan, if you know Kurt Duncan, his great-great-great-grandfather is listed on there out of Fulton County. And the 85th was with Sherman all the way to the end. Kind of see where they were, Chattanooga. They kind of got into the very, very end of Vicksburg for the siege, but they weren't in the battles leading up to it. And then the other one's the 103rd, which most of you are familiar with, and I'll do a deeper dive into the 103rd here in a minute. All right, here's the 17th out of Peoria. So they muster in May 24th, 1861. Again, this, Fort Sumter was only a little more than a month earlier, so this is really quick for these units to form up. 2 Fulton County companies, like I talked about. Sorry if I'm redundant a little bit, I'll repeat myself, but first time doing this, so I'm trying to capture it all. Leonard Ross, Lewistown. There was also a surgeon, Charles B. Tompkins from Lewistown, that enlisted, but he ended up getting promoted. Here's a picture of him as a lieutenant. And he performed very, very well at Shiloh, and actually all the battles. He was very well thought of. He's actually featured down at, when Coach Bennett and I were down at Shiloh a couple years ago, there's a picture of him in the National Park Museum, him from Lewistown. It's pretty amazing. Another fun fact, James Earp, older brother of Wyatt and Virgil, was in the 17th. He would be injured at Frederickstown in Missouri. It's really their first skirmish or battle. He gets shot in the shoulder, and then he ends up sitting out the rest of the war because of his injury. He's actually out at Deadwood for the famous gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881 or 82. But he wasn't actually at the gunfight. He was at his saloon or somewhere that he owned a saloon. He was the smart older brother, kind of like I am in my family. My brother's not. I wish he was here. Another fun fact, Thomas Layton was from Lewistown, and I saw a citation that said he was this guy that wrote this thought that he was the first Illinois soldier killed in the Civil War, and that was at Frederickstown on October 21st. I haven't confirmed that. I really need to do a little more research on that to see if that's true, but if he wasn't, he was one of the first. That was an early skirmish, and he was killed there. So this is out of the Illinois Adjutant's General Report. This is a source that I used a lot. It kind of lists out who the staff was. You can see from out of the Peoria unit just a splattering of Fulton County people that were in leadership positions. And then I'll talk here real quick about the two companies. So Company C, again, high concentration in Canton, a lot of Fairview as well, Ellisville, Liverpool. You'll see some in here that aren't Fulton County. I just kind of cut and pasted, but some of these aren't obviously Bloomington. But that's what they did. They filled the roles with, they call this the Fulton County Company, but they might bring it. They had people that left, deserted, got sick, couldn't make it, and then they had these onesies, twosies that they would throw in there and help make the numbers right. Okay. So by war's end, these are the deaths. These are the ones either killed or died out of Company Charlie during the Civil War. So you can kind of see, Canton, Ellisville had 3 out of the 12 were killed. The records don't always say how they died. I guarantee most of the time, if it doesn't say killed, and I kind of highlighted killed at Shiloh, if it says died, it's typically they were sick. The amount of sickness that went on in the ranks was unbelievable. In fact, 2, sometimes 3 more deaths were incurred due to sickness than combat related. And that's just the sign of the times. 9 for Lewistown. Now, I wrote Lewiston on purpose, and some of you in here are twitching like Madonna, because that makes you really angry. But that's how it was written. And when this unit was formed, that's how they scribed people from Lewistown was Lewiston. It's one of the only places that it actually says Lewiston. Almost everywhere else it was Lewistown. 103rd, when we get to that, was all Lewistown. So, cool. Thought I'd get a charge out of somebody right here. All right, man of the hour for the 17th, Mr. Ross. Most of you know this. If you're historical society people in here, this is easy. You know the fact that he was the son of Osian and founded the town. By the time he was 5 or 6, he was in Havana with his family because Osian moved on and he founded the town of Havana and Mason County. Got one county and one county wasn't enough for him, but I think he sensed a business venture by running the ferry across the Illinois River. It was the only, just like the bridge in Havana now, it was the only place to get across the river between Pekin and Beardstown. So he ran that. His dad passed away in 1837. They moved to Canton, and he starts prepping to go to college, which he does. He went to Illinois College down in Jacksonville for those 2 years to study law. He indeed studies law. He is not a full partner, but he's in the law office at Davidson and Kellogg in Canton. And he and his brother marry sisters. But his wife, Catherine, died in March of 1862. So that was pivotal for him. It wasn't uncommon to lose your spouse, obviously, for whatever reason back then. But this was right before the Battle of Shiloh. So he fought at Fort Donelson, and by the time his unit got down to Pittsburgh Landing, right before the battle, he doesn't know there's going to be a battle. He goes home to take care of his family and his dead wife. So he misses he's not actually at Shiloh, which is kind of ironic when you see the monument that's built to him there. This was his war experience. So he fought with his brother Lewis in the Mexican War. His brother outranked him, as older brothers should, and he was a first lieutenant. It's a little sketchy at the end of his Mexican War experience because one day he just basically says, "I'm out and I'm going home." The Mexican War wasn't over, but he basically walked away and he was marked as AWOL, or absent without leave, by his company. But it never followed him after the war, and when it was all said and done, it wasn't like he had a black mark against his name, and it was really that I could find any negative repercussion because of that. Man, time is flying by here. Okay, he does the same thing in the Civil War. And in July 22nd, that's shortly after Vicksburg, he says, and I'll kind of talk about it when we go through the order of battle, but he's in Helena, Arkansas, kind of as a district commander of that area. And once Vicksburg's over, he thinks the war is pretty much wrapped up, and he says, "I'm out, I'm going home." Again, it never really followed him. So two major U.S. conflicts that he just kind of, when it was all said and done, he was brave in battle, and he was there for his men, but it was like, I don't know what triggered it or why he did it, but when he was done, he was out. So this is after the war. This is a picture. This is out of the 1871 plat book, and that's his house and his spread with his livestock, artist rendition, of course, outside of Avon. And this is present day. Chris verified that the house is still there. He's been here on that porch for some reenactments, right? I didn't even know before doing this place existed. So
yeah, it's a spectacular place. And in fact, I think it's the site of the first agricultural fair in Fulton County. He actually, and that kind of plays right into this. He holds multiple offices. He runs twice for Congress, and he's defeated twice. His political ambitions really weren't all that great. But when he lived near Avon, he was a preeminent stock breeder. He was a Mason here in town in Lodge 104. Fulton County Ag Society, he was a charter member of that. Very, very active in breeding. And it takes him out to Iowa. He moves to Iowa City. But in 1894, he returns to Lewistown as a part owner of a bank here in town. And he passes away, and he's buried up here in the cemetery, if you want to visit. Go through the battles real quick. So this is the Western Theater. Again, Cairo's kind of up there at the business or bottom end of the green, Illinois up there. And that's where they're at in October 61 and February through the winter. I'm just going to touch on some of the bigger battles. There was countless skirmishes that went on all over the place, but I'm just going to kind of show you geographically where this stuff was. That's where I talked about the Lewistown boy being killed at Fredericktown, Missouri, and that's where James Earp was wounded. From there, Fort Henry, they really didn't have a big piece in that. That was basically a brown water Navy conflict. Our
ironclads basically took care of Fort Henry and did the business work of the fighting. But it caused the people at Fort Henry to evacuate. They went 12 miles off the Tennessee River, boom, right over to Fort Donelson on the Cumberland, and that's where they fought at Fort Donelson. This gave the Union the first major victory, not just in the Western Theater, but really in the whole war, and it really put Grant on the map. Grant rose to fame after this battle, and it really put him on Lincoln's radar for future command opportunities. But he kind of blows it at the next place. The target for this movement is not Shiloh. Shiloh was an accident. Shiloh was affected by the Confederates, not the North. The real target was just below there at Corinth, Mississippi. It was a crossroads of two major Confederate rail lines. The theater in the West was basically about going after strategic targets, either ports on the river or railroad lines. Anything that could supply the Confederate Army in the East was the targets for the Western Army. And that is shown over and over in these battles. McPherson famously says, we landed at Pittsburgh Landing to fight at Corinth, but Corinth came to us. And what he means is Albert Sidney Johnston and his army was sitting down at Corinth, and instead of waiting for the Union Army to show up, they went up and met them coming basically where they landed on the Tennessee River. I don't go down these rabbit holes with these battles because I can see everybody's eyes glazing over. Except Matt.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
So Shiloh's a mess for the Union Army. They're surprised on the morning of April 6th. Overwhelmed, that's where Prentiss is killed. It pushes the Union, Grant and Sherman all back to the river, and almost everything was lost except Don Carlos Buell, the commander of the Army of the Ohio, showed up just in the nick of time with 20,000 men during the night, during a downpour, and was the next morning able to push the Confederates all the way back off the field and recover what they had lost, and then open the way to Corinth, Mississippi after that. So I'm going to fast forward. Shiloh. So Ross is, again, I told you, he's home taking care of his family. His wife had passed away, right? We get down there, and I'm like, holy crap, there is a massive monument for this brigade commander. That's for Leonard Ross. It's on the battlefield at Shiloh. But the irony was he wasn't there. And the even worse news, I'll show you. Even worse news is the guy that replaced him, he was killed. Colonel Wraith was killed there. So he got a really cool, that's a cannon, that's an awesome monument there. But he was wounded on the battlefield and taken off the field, and the Confederates had him on a hospital ships. They had hospital boats on the Mississippi. Each army had hospital ships. It's crazy. But he died like a week after the war of his injuries, so he didn't make it. But he was. But anyway, Shiloh was the first battle that got everybody's attention in America that this was going to be a nasty war. It was the deadliest war. This war had more casualties than all the previous battles in American history up to that time combined. That was the scale of this fight, and the fights after this got even worse. You'll see towards the end. Corinth does good there. Vicksburg is the next prize. They fight 5 battles over 17 days. Illinois does really well. The 17th does really well. But Ross ends up in Helena. He doesn't go with his troops. He's up in Helena, Arkansas. I won't get into all, I'm running short on time. It's already been 50, I can't believe it. But he kind of gets parked. I don't know what happened, if he got himself in trouble, what happened. For sure he got replaced after a misadventure in one of the bayous when they were trying to get to Vicksburg, 6 months earlier. Regardless, he sits out Vicksburg. The 17th stays in Vicksburg after this battle, and they stay there for another whole year holding down the fort while the rest of the army moves on. So kind of give you an idea what ends up happening here with Fulton County lost 13 and Yeah. So that's kind of the story of the 17th. After that, they say, hey, 17th's been decimated. You guys are going to consolidate with the 8th Illinois, whatever's left of you. Some of them went and joined the 103rd. That's what made the 103rd so good. They got some of these 17th officers and really helped them out when they kind of went off to war. Which we're going to talk about next. I'm going to breeze through this. This is the meat and potatoes, though. Is everybody doing okay? Yeah. We might need a break. I don't want to run too off the way because some of you came a long ways to my Peoria friends, Broomfield. So the 103rd, that's our, you know, that's our guys, our people, right? So they go into Peoria. It's all of the all 804 men, by and large, are from Fulton County. Again, there's always these cats that show up from Timbuktu that found their way into the regiment, but they barely had enough to have a regiment, but they scraped it out. And again, I put in here, a lot of the officers were veterans of the 17th that I just talked about. Amos Babcock was the guy that basically formed the unit. But he never signed on to really be the commander. He just basically wanted to be the guy that formed this up. He knew Governor Yates. He had the political clout to do this, and he got it going, and because of him, they were able to push on with a full regiment. But Willard Dickerman from Liverpool, that's this fella here, he's with them almost to the end. He doesn't quite make it. He dies at Resaca, Georgia, in the Atlanta campaign on the way to Atlanta. And he was beloved by his men, and he was a major, major loss for them when he passed away. But his replacement was George Wright from here from Lewistown, and he took his place clear to the end of the war. I'd throw a Rice in there. Henry, he was in Company H. He's buried up here. He died in Jackson, Tennessee. I think, again, from sickness. I don't know that for sure, but I'm fairly sure so many guys died from just dysentery, typhoid. It was nasty. 7 of our county boys died at Andersonville Prison, which, if any of you know, I've heard of that. That's an infamous prison camp that was treacherous. Here's a breakdown by town. Again, these are the leadership people, non-commissioned officers. And then I'll kind of go through each of the companies real quick. Company A was 48 out of Lewistown. It was a big number. Young Hickory, if you know where it's at, you probably know this answer, but the rest of us in here don't know where that's at, but it's a township by Ellisville, right? And it's, a lot of these guys, when they signed up, they would put their township, very rural back then. Not everybody lived in towns like like a lot of us do now. So you see something like Buckhart is a township in Fulton County, Pleasant, Pile of Fairview and Company D. Company E. F. They got a hodgepodge of everybody. You see there's a McDonough, some of those I don't even know what they are. There's some townships. Company G, 7 out of Fairview, and one of these guys out of Fairview is the great-great-grandfather of Max Latimer, who's up here in the front row. Made a special trip down here, a good friend of mine. And his, David joined out of Fairview. He was wounded at Griswoldville, Georgia, but we think he was just a flesh wound. So he lasted the rest of the war. That's probably a picture of him around 1900 at either a GAR, Grand Army of the Republic event, or a reunion. Do you happen to know, Max?
I think, pretty sure the Brigade was a
GAR. So, very nice. Thank you for sharing those with us. Company H, a pile of Lewistown. Bernie that. Who knew, huh? 47 of those guys. Where did they come from? Can't. Yeah. So you can kind of see, it's really neat. The 103rd, you know, for us, if you live here, you're from here, this is the quintessential regiment from here, which is pretty cool. And I'm gonna kind of breeze through this. They kind of bounce around, again, down in Jackson, Tennessee, that's where the Henry Rice ended up dying. They're at Memphis. They get to Vicksburg kind of at the very end. They aren't at the 5 battles at the front end of it, but they get there in time to kind of see some rear action. And they were there for the siege, the 47-day siege that kind of culminated in the capture. From there, they were at Chattanooga, and this is where they start the infamous Georgia campaign, or Atlanta campaign is what they call it. And there's a series of these battles that take place in northern Georgia that were deadly, and Resaca's in. I put Dallas. I've seen it in 2 places. One place had him dying in Dallas. I know for sure he died on May 30th, but I don't know if he died from his wounds at Resaca or he died at Dallas. I'm trying to pin that down, but one of those 2 places he was mortally wounded. And this is a famous Kennesaw Mountain. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that was a deadly, deadly fight.
There's a lot of Lewistown guys, I think.
A lot of Lewistown guys were killed there. Basically, they were trying to get up a hill where the Confederates were at the top, and the Confederates just decimated them in waves. They would just slaughter them. Battle of Atlanta, and then the siege after that, and then Sherman goes scorched earth. He peels off a corps. Thomas goes back up north to fight. That's how he ends up fighting Hood up in Nashville and Franklin. But Sherman continues on and says, basically, I'm going to make Georgia howl. That's what he said. And he did. By Christmas, or just before Christmas, they reach Savannah and capture Savannah, and he telegraphs Abraham Lincoln and tells him that he's giving Savannah, the city of Savannah, as a Christmas gift to Abraham Lincoln. Mighty nice of them. They fight, they keep going, okay? The war's not over. Now you got the Carolina campaign. Again, not enough time to just skirmish after little battle, all the way to get up to North Carolina. Bentonville was one of their last major fights, and it culminates in them being at Joseph Johnston's surrenders at Bennett's house. Greg, are you familiar with this place, relation or anything? Nothing? No.
I think he fell asleep.
Yeah, those are great places, great battles.
Bennett?
And we won, so that was good.
We did win. We did win. So from there, they would go on to the Grand Review out in D.C. In May and do the parade and all of that stuff. But they lost a lot of guys. Again, that shows the Andersonville. All right. I'm just going to show you really quick. These are the dead, the killed and died from each of these companies. It's staggering when you see these lists to me. You know, each of these men had a family, a mother, a father, a brother, a wife, and it was just staggering the amount of. And think of 150 regiments in the state, and then think of all the states that contributed. It's staggering to think about it. If you thought about it in present day numbers, again, yeah. Whenever somebody says, we need another civil war, I don't know what they're talking about. Kind of blasting through these. But yeah, it's staggering the amount of men that were killed. Here's the last 2 companies. Bernie died again. Look at these guys. 9 out of 47 were killed. Yeah. 22% of these guys didn't make it home. These are 3 quick monuments. Never knew this till I started studying it. Some of you history nuts in here probably knew this, but there's a monument in Peoria that the 85th, which had 4 companies out of, that's the one I just told you about, my buddy Kurt Duncan's great-great-grandfather, and the 103rd, they were camped there for these dates, and that's on Adams Street. You can go see that. 103rd at Vicksburg and 103rd at Chattanooga. What do you say, it's a bad part of town? Don't stay out of there.
During the day.
in the dark. Jeanette, is that true?
Yes.
Everybody doing okay? I'm gonna blast through this.
Yeah.
This is my third one. I'll go through this really quick. This character, I wanted to touch on. So William Pitt Kellogg is from Kent, and he was a close personal friend of Abraham Lincoln. And in fact, I think that's why he got elected to be the regimental commander of the 7th Illinois. Okay. School teacher, prominent Canton lawyer, close friend of Abraham Lincoln. He's a Republican. Marries Emily Wills, who Wills ends up writing a book, a journal, a great diary that you can find, and I have a copy of the war. He is appointed to the Supreme Court before the war, right before the war in Nebraska Territory, but he gets that leave of absence to come back, and he joins the 7th Illinois and then quickly becomes the regimental commander. Ends up being brigadier general. He doesn't last very long. He lasts about a year. He's another one tapped out. But what he did after the war is pretty incredible. One of the last acts that Lincoln did before he was assassinated was appoint Kellogg as the lead customs agent and the port of New Orleans. And that was a big deal. Okay? Again, we had captured Farragut had captured New Orleans in early or late '61. It was a big deal. After the war, he's perceived as a carpetbagger, and young folks in here probably never heard this term or don't know what a carpetbagger is, but if you're older, you've heard this term. It was a very disparaging way to talk about Yankees that came down to the South that were trying to buy up land, get political appointments, basically take over the South, because the South had a whole generation of men that was killed basically after the war. It was free for the taking, and these carpetbaggers would go down there, literally making a garment bag out of carpet. That's why they call them carpetbaggers. And he was one of them. He ends up being the governor. They elect him the governor of Louisiana. And when he died, he's buried at Arlington National Cemetery. So kind of a pretty unique little factoid there. I don't have a lot on the 7th, but we'll kind of breeze through it. Cairo, Burst Point, which is right across the river. Island number 10 was a strategic point on the Mississippi. That was their first contact with the Confederates. They're down at Corinth, Mississippi, and they take part in a famous cavalry raid called Grierson's Raid. Okay, this happened just before Vicksburg. It was it was 3 regiments of 1,700 men of cavalry, the 6th Illinois, the 7th Illinois, and the Indiana unit. And they tear up central and western Mississippi to distract from what Grant's doing and Sherman trying to get down to Vicksburg. And it causes the Confederates to send a lot of manpower, a lot of equipment, and a lot of time and energy chasing these guys around while Grant was doing his thing to get the whole army in place. So it was really important. One of the most daring and consequential cavalry raids in the war.
John Wayne was a hero because
He was, that's true. Poor Soldiers was based on Grierson's Raid, you're right. So they're down here. They take part in the siege of Port Hudson, and bam, they finish up at, I mentioned before, Franklin. Franklin was like the Antietam of the West. And then Nashville. It's a lot of miles. That raid was 600 miles in 2 weeks. We're almost done, folks. These were the killed from Company K, the Canton guys. These were all Canton that were killed in the war from the 7th Illinois Cavalry. getting close to the end, I promise. I just want to touch on Vicksburg, okay? I got a foot stomp Vicksburg. If you've never been there and you're from Illinois, has to be a bucket list item for you. These are the Illinois units that fought at Vicksburg or around Vicksburg. Not all of them fought, but around it. I highlighted the Fulton County, the units that had Fulton County. Isn't that staggering? So Illinois was over half of the fighting force down at Vicksburg. So we're the champions down there. ILL. So, all right. So that's some staggering information. I was gonna give you a little down and dirty on how it went, but I don't think I'm gonna because we don't have a lot of time. But you can read all about Vicksburg. There's a lot of books written about Vicksburg, and it's fascinating to me because our boys were down there, and it speaks to me. That's where Ross. So that was the Yazoo Pass, and he tried to get a fighting force. But he was stopped at that Fort Pemberton, which was basically a bunch of cotton bales that the Confederates set up, and pushed Ross back. I think that's why Ross was taken out of command, to be honest. It was a failed probe down to try to get a path to Vicksburg. We could talk for hours about Vicksburg, but I won't do that to you. But the cool thing is, if you get down there, this is the Illinois Monument or Memorial to the fallen. This was dedicated in 1906, and it is jaw-dropping. If you've ever been there, you know what I'm talking about. It's modeled after the Parthenon. So inside here are these bronze plaques. There's 60 some of these plaques, and all 36,000 names by unit are on these bronze plaques of all the Illinois soldiers that were there. The seal of Illinois on the floor in the mosaic. You can see the dome at the top. It's breathtaking to me. 47 steps going up for each day of the siege. 36,325 Illinois soldiers are all their names, a lot of Fulton County down there. Bronze bald eagle. The cost at the time was $194,000. I did a calculation converter thing. In today's dollars, it's over 7 million, but it's got to be more than that with the material and stuff that you can't even find probably anymore. Elmer, you probably know this. Okay, just some stats. We'll wrap up. Raw numbers. The South, you can see how many people they lost in the South, just staggering. The North had so many more men, so many more. Look how many we had eligible that didn't even serve, over 2.5 million. This is kind of by state. In the North initially, New York and Ohio and Pennsylvania, of course, carried most of the East. Ohio had a lot of forces in the West with us. Illinois and Indiana. Illinois lost, upwards of 32, in some cases 34,000, depending where you look. We were like number 2 or tied for number 3 in the amount of deaths from the Civil War of all the states. These are the southern deaths. Virginia, North Carolina are up there, Alabama. These were the deaths by battle, or the casualties by battle. There's Gettysburg, of course, is the big one. Chickamauga was in the west. Shiloh, Stones River, and Vicksburg kind of the ones that would be in the Western Theater. And these are the fatalities or combat wounded from the Civil War clear down to present day when you look at the numbers. Staggering. I think this might be the last slide. Again, these are some of the publications that you can look up. A lot of these the National Archives have some of these accessible. You can buy these on Amazon in some cases. Wills was, he fought with the 7th Illinois Cav and the 103rd, so he was the brother-in-law to Kellogg. Henry Orndorff, reminiscences of the Civil War, he went in with 6 other buddies from all over the county, and they shared kind of what they experienced and wrote down this publication. His sister, I don't think of Will's. Will's sister up top was the one that published that on his behalf after he died. And I saw, Chris, you had a copy of this Infernal War. A lot of you have heard of this or have read this. This is William and Jane Stander's correspondence with each other throughout the war. He, really, he was not a happy camper to fight in this war, to say the least. He was, by all accounts, basically, I wouldn't call him a copperhead, but he was really, really close to being an anti-Lincoln kind of Democrat kind of guy. He was not a fan of Abraham Lincoln. Like a lot of soldiers of the time, they served to preserve the Union, not necessarily to free the slaves. Many would change their mind as they got into the South and saw what slavery was when they saw it firsthand. And a lot of them ended up life-changing experiences and opinions on slavery after the war. But this guy wasn't having it in the beginning. And these are some other books that are, kind of on topic that I think you guys would be interested in. I just recently bought Flags in Illinois. It's an in-depth, detailed publication of all the battle flags up by unit of what were kept after the war. Pretty interesting to me. All right, some of you guys are squirming, I know. I went 15 over, I apologize. I'll dial it in better next time.
It's time to retire.
If you want to ask questions afterward, well, open up questions, because some of you probably need to go to the bathroom or want to leave. But if you want to stay back and ask questions, we can talk over to the side. If you need to leave, you need to leave. No harm, no foul. But I just want to thank you all for being here tonight. My wife, Jeanette, you stay up and pay attention.
I'm sorry, I'll answer questions for you up here, because I'm knowledgeable now.
So Rick does, I came to the Camp Ellis presentation he gave, and before seeing his presentation, I thought, there's gonna be like 12 old people here, and half of them will be asleep, and that's just how it's gonna go. And then I come here, I'm like, holy cow, this is a big deal. Your presentation was phenomenal, and I had to up my game, and my wife's had to put up with me not doing things around the house.
It was worth it, it was phenomenal.
Thanks, John, Chris, thanks for coming. He's gonna stick around and answer questions too, right?
That's how it is.
Hey, thank you guys for coming. Don't forget, talk to Chris.
I was like holding them
We
up.
have
so
there's three teachers in here. So if you have any more questions, ask Steve. I told my wife this presentation was going to be 3 hours. She says I'm staying home. You can clear